Welcome to the AI Forecast. I'm your host, Paul Muller. Join me along with leading companies and industry experts as we explore the past, the present, and the future of data and AI in the enterprise. The AI Forecast is, of course, proudly brought to you by our sponsor, Cloudera. Well, according to a recent study, 96% of enterprise IT leaders plan to expand their use of AI agents in the next year as the benefits that they offer become a priority for enterprise strategists everywhere. No surprise, really, as agentic technology promises to be a huge unlock for what I'd describe as game-changing levels of automation, efficiency, and agility across dozens of industry use cases. So as enthusiastic as that 96% stat sounds, the reality is that data privacy, integration, complexity, and implementation cost issues continue to slow progress. Well, today's guest believes a unified enterprise-grade data strategy is going to be key to addressing those challenges. To talk about what that means to enterprises and developers, we're joined by Chief Strategy Officer for Cloudera, Abhas Ricky. Abhas, for those of you who don't know him, has a storied career with a background across the biggest names in finance, manufacturing, telecommunications, healthcare, life sciences, retail, e-commerce, as well as the public sector. And all of that experience really informs his outlook on how these new technologies can be adopted by the enterprise. So hear more. Welcome to the podcast, Abhas Ricky.
Great to meet you again, Paul. It's been a while since we last caught up in New York. As I told you earlier, I was hoping for your trademark sport jacket. But unfortunately, we'll have to do with a white shirt today, and therefore I was trying to twine with you.
Look, we look like we've been coordinating our wardrobes ahead of time. Which, of course, will make no sense to anyone just listening on the audio version of this podcast. Hey, before we jump into talking about Agentic, we do a little thing called the lightning round to get started, the Fast Four. Chance for people to get to know you a little differently. You ready to do this?
Yeah. Favorite setting, Melbourne. Favorite brunch, Melbourne.
You've obviously been, and it is a good place to have brunch. Thanks for. I'm sure the Lord Mayor will be very pleased that you've been promoting the city. Hey, let's get into it. First question. What would people say is your superpower, Abhas?
Build successful teams.
Great superpower. The most impactful technology of all time?
Generative AI.
Topic at hand. What would you like to see AI automate for you personally in your future?
I think generative AI will lead to a point whereby we're starting to have autonomous robots. So if there was a robot that was small enough that I could carry on with a plane everywhere that sorted out nutrition for me, including prepared meals, I think my life will be much more healthier and much more happier, and my family will be much more happy as well.
I love it. Just a quick side note. We obviously asked this question of all of our guests, and the topic of meal preparation has come up as probably the most popular answer. So for budding product managers out there, there's a hint, there's a market there for it waiting to happen. We all have, what I would describe as sometimes subconscious superpowers when it comes to how we work with data as professionals, as leaders. What are some of the best practices or hacks or tips or tricks you've learned as someone who works with data every day?
I think three core things. One is always authenticate the source for the data that is coming through. Because in today's world, that can come through from multiple dimensions. The second one is always understand the overarching outcome that you're trying to seek. So the use case in technical speak, because the data is just, it's like law in ways, right? Because, for example, judges don't necessarily always follow the law to the letter. They actually understand the law, interpret it, take the precedent and apply that based on circumstances. I think from that perspective, we have to do the same thing from a data perspective. So whatever the use case, whatever the story that you're trying to either assess or hypotheses that you're trying to prove or disprove, keep that context in mind always, because otherwise it's just a set of numbers or a set of anecdotes and attributes. And the third one is For the longest period of time, trust has not been a topic front and center. But because of the advent of AI, and particularly Agentic AI, we have to make sure that we can trust the data that we're going to use to train our models or to get to inferencing or any of the agentic capabilities that large organizations will get to. So make sure that you've been able to trust the various dimensions of the data that you're getting through.
I'm not surprised. It's probably the most thoughtful answer we've had to that question on the show, but it definitely is the most thoughtful answer we've had to that question, to the point I've written them all down because I think they're really great pieces of advice. Let's jump into the topic of agentic, given that you've brought it up. But before we do that, we talked about this a little before, but maybe just walk us through your background, because you do have a broad set of experiences, and talk to us about your role as Chief Strategy Officer.
I'm an electrical engineer by training. I've done a few things in the banking world and the management consulting world. I joined the company super early when Hortonworks was a startup. We built the business up. We merged with Cloudera. That's how I came to Cloudera. And then obviously we went private with our financial sponsors in May 2021. Over the last couple of years, what I've been particularly focused on is three things. One, capital structure transformation. So we have been able to achieve that. We were negative margins back in the day. We're a rule of 50 company now. So we're generating very healthy cash flow whilst being a growth company. So that's done. The second is helping customers move away from legacy technology, which used to be MapReduce workloads and Hadoop, onto a core flagship product, which is called as Cloudera Data Platforms. It's the lakehouse for the future, for tomorrow, which powers all of your analytical and enterprise AI needs. That has taken a lot of time because, as you can imagine, we have very large customers with very large deployments on mission critical use cases. So it's in teamwork. It's an army of people who've been able to get together to get through customers. And then the third one is driving strategic partnerships, whether be it with AWS Bedrock or NVIDIA with our inferencing service, or Crew AI on the agentic side, or even the model providers with Anthropic and Mistral and anyone else. But from a day-to-day perspective, I view myself that I'm paid to do two things. One, I'm paid to predict signals before they become signals. And therefore, I have to be ahead of what's happening and what's the most likely trend that will become a reality, given the pragmatism around ease of execution as well. And then the second is I treat myself like a product manager for the company. So what does a product manager do? They understand product market fit. What is the pain point of a customer for which persona, for which use case? They define the requirements, go back to engineering and say, go build it. They go and work with marketing and market the product. They work with sales teams to help customers become successful, which leads to revenue generation. I think I have to do the same thing. Unfortunately, I have a very atypical role. So I have all things, strategy, biz dev, M&A, but I also have pricing and packaging for all products and services, product launches. But the thing that I enjoy particularly is I do have some of the go-to-market functions, including the vertical GMs, which allows me to meet multiple enterprise customers across industries. And that is when I'm learning, and that is when I'm happiest, because everyone would like to understand the biggest problems for the customers going forward.
I think that's great. And I mean, to your point about trying to pull a highly attenuated signal from the noise, I mean, there's no better place to work out what future problems to solve than to listen to some of the challenges people are facing today. I think that's great. Let's talk about the big headline from the most recent report on Agentic. And I suppose the headline, 96% of enterprises plan to expand their use of AI agents. The question almost becomes, what are the other 4% doing? Why do you think Agentic AI is the resonance has been so strong with enterprises at the moment?
If you look at the last 40 years of technology, the dream's always been, how can you make complex tasks simpler? And that has led to multiple forms of evolution. So you had business process automation, you had robotic process automation. There was this whole thing about how can I actually do that whilst making my existing processes digital. So digital transformation came about. Then there was a trend for cloud that happened because majority of the large banks, telcos, insurers, manufacturers, etc., said, well, what if I could actually get all of this as a service, having to just focus on my primary core business that I do. But then because of digital transformation, there's a wave that happened that every company is a software company. We have more lines of code on the cars that we drive and in sometimes in airplanes. And majority of the innovation that happens is through the software element. So what's happening is if you extend that today, what generative AI has been able to do is they've been able to create a worker, a digital worker in simple terms, which has a memory and which has the ability to process tasks on its own, which is the word autonomous that you come through with that. So naturally, the productivity improvements that you see are 10x to 100x. The improvements on capabilities on the shop floor, for example, for a automotive provider, or the customer service experience that we all get when we're interacting with a bank or when we're interacting with an e-commerce company, the overall experience now is multiple times better because of what we call as chatbots or assistants. So I do think that majority of the use cases that we have will get impacted by agentic workflows. And the reason is because an agent is nothing but a 3D, in a very crude manner, a 3D digital twin of what humans were thinking. But the reason why it's so powerful is because it has a brain and a memory and is able to learn from its behaviors from the past on its own without having to necessarily constantly update the attributes as you write the lines of software to get through with it. So I do think that that is the primary reason why developers are building that and why businesses are using it is because of what I said. It's 10x to 100x productivity improvements, which leads to better cost performance, which leads to better revenues, which leads to better services, lower risk, and the whole 9 years associated with that.
I'd like to get to some of the use cases and the risks in a minute because, to your point, if your agents, if the source of the information feeding the agents and the trust level isn't there in the data that's being used to train them, of course, the cure may be worse than the disease potentially. But we'll get to that in just a minute because when you talked about use cases, it put me in mind of the report because the report itself highlights different use cases like performance optimization, security monitoring, etc. From your perspective, you obviously talk to a lot of different enterprises. What are some of the most interesting or unexpected ways you're seeing agentic technology either being explored or applied in the real world at the moment?
One of the most interesting use cases from an impact perspective is healthcare and life sciences. We have some of the world's largest enterprises using agenting applications in production. And some of these agents are being used for diagnostic assistance, where they can review the x-rays and spot early signs of illnesses, whether that's for pneumonia, whether that's for any other disease there might be, which typically is very hard for a particular provider or a doctor or a human, and it's very easy to miss. So that itself is not only boosting diagnostic accuracy and speed, but also help with canonical drug discovery research as well. So imagine if we can help accelerate drug discovery by up to 10 years. That's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives impacted in a positive way. So that's one. If you look at telecommunications industry, which typically has been very CapEx heavy industry, but they're also at the forefront of innovation because they have a lot more data than a lot of other companies. So they've been talking about agents predict churn. How do you track subtle signs whereby customers have reduced usage or they've been complaining about particular features and attributes? How can you proactively identify that and help the customer get a better service that increases your retention rates? That's the simple use case. But now we also have telco companies. I was in Japan and Korea and I met like 19 enterprise customers whereby they're talking about how do you use AI for radio access networks. So if you're aware, radio access network is a very CapEx intensive investment, and people want to increase their ROI for that. But a very good example is if you have a tower or a mast that's normally sleeping between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., how can you actually take the pent-up capacity and offer that to some of the other use cases there might be? So how do you use AI agents for spectral efficiency, for radio signal beaming? But also, how do you take the next wave where I believe this will go towards is how do you take some of these telecom base stations and convert them into GPU as a service and provide inferencing capabilities? Because remember, GPUs are the core processing powers that make all of these capabilities come to life. And a large portion of that is right now being built by NVIDIA. And there's naturally a shortage because everyone wants GPUs to get through with that. But then at the same time, if you come to banking organizations, I'll give you a real example. I bank with a particular bank, one of the large bulge bracket banks in New York. My wealth manager advisor, normally when I would tell him or her to give me a product to structure based on my requirements, it would take 2 days because they would go back to the fixed income decks. They would go back to the equity strategies. They would go back to the DCMCM teams, compile a report and come back to me. Now they're able to give that to me in minutes because the agents are able to summarize the documentation. They're automatically able to apply the filtering conditions that I have around my risk tolerance, around my preference in asset classes and my expected return. And they're able to structure that for me in a matter of minutes. So from a customer standpoint, I'm exceptionally happy, but also I know that the ability of the likelihood of the portfolio or the structured product that was offered to me to be successful is relatively higher because it's now being processed much more thoroughly through machines with a higher level of accuracy.
So thinking about the report, then you can see why obviously it's so attractive to enterprises. You think about the report, were there any particular sort of statistics or areas that jumped out to you, especially as a strategist, where you looked at that and went, that's interesting?
Yeah, I think the first one that really popped up was what are the blockers for enterprise adoption? And a lot of them came down to what we were talking about at the start of the podcast, which is data privacy, integration, and data quality. So there was a stat which said almost 53% of enterprises stated that data privacy is the single biggest blocker for their enterprise AI adoption. Now, the reason why I think it's important is because it can be otherwise very complex to manage autonomous agents. Imagine if they have access to vast, oftentimes sensitive data as well. You're introducing risk at every point they're interacting with the different systems there might be, whether it's for CRM, whether that's for SAP, whether that's for PII data inside health records, whether that's for financial regulatory data, which may or may not have been used by a particular agent. So creating systems that have authorization capabilities, that which data can I actually touch, which data can I actually go ahead and use, is a huge challenge. So I give an example oftentimes in very simple terms. So if you and I go to, for the purpose of the conversation, Chase Bank or BOFA or whoever on their app, we expect the agent to be smart to give us a response to a simple question, what's my bank balance, in milliseconds. But we also expect it to be smarter to know, should I have access to that data or not? So that if somebody else asks on behalf, they shouldn't be having that, right? So when you look at autonomous agents, they work through different capabilities within different systems that already exist. So building systems, building architectures, building APIs, building policies, but more importantly, having an enterprise framework to align all of these different rules, attributes, and workflows with a continuous level of governance, metadata governance, control is hard. And I think that's one of the core things that pops to mind. And that's what the opportunity is for a lot of the vendors and providers like ourselves.
So if you're an enterprise that's concerned about some of these issues like data privacy, is this a problem that you should be looking to solve through product, or is this more a function of your processes and your procedures inside your organization? Or both?
I mean, I'm going to sound cliched, but it's people, process, technology, always, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So I think it's a combination of three things. One is you have to be able to architect your use cases in a manner whereby you can seamlessly apply the next level of innovation to whatever the next frontier is. For example, 2021. So I have been going to the World Economic Forum Davos every year. 2021, 2022, there were very few companies on the 1.1 mile strike that were talking about AI. 2023, even a hardware company that sells phones is an AI company. Everyone's talking about AI, right? So naturally, the focus is on AI, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is aware of what the next wave of innovation will be. Models were the big hot thing when ChatGPT happened and OpenAI started to come through. Then people started to move to basic use cases like text summarization, chat Q&A, copilots. But then once agents started to come to the scene, people started to build simple function calling agents that could call a particular API-based function and solve a task.
What's an example?
An example would be create a memo based on reading Paul's W-2. Like very simple, right? But then over a period of time, now we have multi-step reasoning agentic workflows, which can do multiple complex tasks at one. So it's not just read me Paul's W-2, but read me Paul's W-2 and tell me if there are any outliers, and also tell me, has he paid taxes in different tax jurisdictions internationally and nationally as well, and where are the red holes, and has he complied with the FBAR regulations or not? Like, he can do all of those things. So what happens is the innovation will continue to go at a pace that we've never seen before. So therefore, we all have to be able to architect our use cases whereby we can apply the next generation of innovation seamlessly, because you don't have the luxury to spend years trying to update your platform to a different set of architectural construct whilst you apply the next wave of innovation. You have to get to a point whereby a large part of these capabilities are almost built in to what you're doing today. So that's the people side, where you need to understand the use case, you need to understand the context, you need to be able to articulate clearly what the ramifications might be, positive and or negative, for both systems and outcomes, business and technical. But then also you have the product side, which is you need to be able to have next generation products that not only allow you to build forward-looking use case, but can also interact with the existing use cases and sources of data. So for example, one of the things that I always say is we all want to be able to bring the models to the data and not the data to the models. What it means is 74% of all the data sources across the Fortune 2000 companies still sits at a place where it was created. And oftentimes 70 to 85%, depending upon the industry, that's on premises. So if you have an application which is only public cloud, or it doesn't necessarily interact with data sources that are on premises, it's going to be a challenge, and you will spend up an awful lot of time to build integration vectors around that. Which is why we talk about the concept of private AI, which is how can you actually deliver enterprise AI applications in a form factor and deployment form factor of your choice, whether it's public cloud, private cloud, whether it's your desktop, whether it's at the edge, because a lot of the devices will now start to operate where inferencing on the edge is the next frontier where organizations will try and get through with it. So that's how I would look at it, the people side on the services and understanding of use cases and architectural construct, and the product side, which not only allows you to build forward-looking use cases, but also is able to interact well seamlessly and interoperate with existing systems and existing sources of data.
And to close the loop on the people, process, technology thing, and I know you say it is somewhat cliched, but I suppose, the old adage about a cliche is a cliche because it's usually accurate or true. Having the process behind all of that for things like data privacy, having great policy at a board level so that people understand how they should be dealing with data, all of that hygiene, none of that really goes away with agentic, in some respects, it's actually amplified, would you say?
Yeah, and I think the good thing is, for the first time in 40 years, technological solutions is now a board level topic. You don't just have, this is the CIO's problem or this is the CDO's problem, right? Everyone in a board of director, everyone from the CEO and down, talking about how do we actually use generative AI solutions for improving our own processes internally, but also leverage them for building better products and services for their end customers, which they can then monetize at a much higher rate. So I do think that should create a huge momentum for driving these structures, in some cases, even reimagining them. But I would like to close this topic by saying the money is not in automating existing workflows. The money is in reimagining workflows that you and I don't know today, because this is exactly what happened when digital transformation happened. Nobody knew the net new workflows. A lot of us, or I would say almost all of us, will probably not know what the new workflows will be for your particular industry. So how do you reimagine those workflows and build that from? That's where the innovation will happen. That's where the largest value, but also the return for the investment will come through. And I think it will require a leap of faith, and we will have to just hit the speed gun and keep going with it.
I love it. That's a really, really good point. So let's do two things then as we wrap up. So the first is, let's look near term. We're looking at this technology as much as business should be thinking about these transformational use cases and, the art of imagination, the art of the possible. There's also a lot of very hard-headed people out there saying, show me the money. If I understand correctly, Cloudera suggests starting with a sort of a fast to value approach to some of these. What is the fast to value approach, and what are some of the use cases that are kind of absolute surefire wins for most companies?
Typically, whenever we start engaging with a customer, we try and understand what are the problems they're trying to solve and for who, both from a business context and from a technical context. And then, like a lot of other organizations, we built with them a use case prioritization matrix. As part of that, there are some use cases that are low-hanging fruit for the piece of technology that you're trying to apply to. So as I said before, in case of generative AI, text summarization or PDF documentation analysis is a very simple low-hanging fruit, which doesn't take a lot to get through with that. But it also depends upon the use case. So for example, there is a very large bank who told me that about right now it takes me 37 click/signatures and over 4 weeks to go through the entire mortgage process for an individual, whether the mortgage is 200K, whether it's 2 million or larger. Can you do that for us in less than 6 hours? That's a very complex use case. But when you break it down, there are pieces of that we can do very easily, very quickly. It's a low-hanging fruit. So things like, as I was giving you an example of reading the tax documents, reading the benchmark data, reading the various inputs that typically would have been very human intensive, labor intensive. But then there are other systems which might take a little bit longer time, because when you're building systems that have to comply with regulatory pressures, but also have to interoperate with existing systems that might be where you're pulling the data from, that might be longer. So same use case, but if you break the use case down into workflows and sub-workflows, some of those might be much easier. Some of them might take a longer time. So our recommendation always is show value quickly, fast. So break the use case down into workflows, pick the easy ones, prove value, earn the right to go further. And as I said, keep hitting the speed up.
I love it. All right. So let's wrap up with a bit of crystal balling, given that is almost the definition of your day job. Let's look ahead 12, 18 months or longer. I guess you get to pick the time frame. What can we expect from agentic technologies, and more broadly, what can we expect to see out of the AI and data world over the next period of time?
Right now, no one's really doing autonomous agents, fully autonomous agents. There are a few companies like Multion and others who are starting to get through with that. But because of the introduction of new protocols like the Model Context Protocol from Anthropic, or A2A from Google, or ACP from IBM. It's becoming increasingly easier to interact with different systems, because think of them as like a USB-C, which you can plug in, and the systems now start to talk to each other. So because of those, I think the adoption of overall agentic workflows and agentic apps will increase much faster than what we have thought about, because all you need is, for the purpose of the conversation, create an MCP client server hub, and there are multiple companies like Smithereer, etc., doing that, and suddenly you can achieve a use case that you weren't able to do before. So in summary, in the next 12 to 18 months, I fully expect certain organizations to be able to offer fully autonomous agent building capabilities. Will that be adopted at scale at large enterprises? Time will tell. If I were to guess, I think there will be certain challenges around that, right? Now, on the second front, and overall Gen AI, I think based on, you're a fun guy, so just to spice up a conversation a little bit and introduce a very mellow topic called geopolitics into our conversation.
What could go wrong?
Yeah, exactly. Hashtag. So I think AI is getting balkanized and will continue to get balkanized.
Yeah.
And therefore, we're starting to see such important regulatory guidelines from almost all geopolitical state actors around sovereign AI, data residency, making sure that you have an advantage in that. So the large model providers, whether it's Mistral in France and Europe, or whether it's Cohere in Canada, or whether it's Anthropic and OpenAI in the US, I think all of these large companies will start to build systems, just like Palantir does, because the value is in helping get customers to build enterprise AI apps, not just building models or agents and letting them figure it out. Mm-hmm. And as AI starts to get balkanized, when you're trying to build systems, the delivery is still through people, it's through services, like Palantir used to do with forward deployed engineers, still does. So I think it will all come down to, because of these two phenomena, large companies who have gazillions of dollars of resources for the next gen of research, building systems, and geopolitical requirements, I think it will come down to talent arbitrage. And I do think that the companies who will be able to be most successful as a customer or as a vendor will be those who have the capabilities to interpret the various innovative parameters, whether it's models, agents, whether it's different protocols, whether it's different workflows, to be able to build enterprise AI apps. So I think the next 12 to 18 months will prove that the full stack LLM engineers will actually be more in demand than what we have seen before. Yes, certain jobs will now be augmented, but what I'm trying to say is that there'll be more jobs that will be created as opposed to reduction in jobs. It's just that the nature of the jobs will be different. It's actually the human element of stitching together all of these technologies that will get through with that. Having said that, now that I've given the disclaimer, never push against the tide of general intelligence. There are a lot of companies who are trying to get to AGI as a concept, but also as a reality. There are multiple luminaries who've given their own timelines. I am not one, so I don't intend to give one, but I am an optimist, and therefore I'm hoping that AI will truly create hundreds of billions of dollars or even trillions of dollars in enterprise value. And then hopefully that will lead to a better world for everyone, including you and I.
I love it. I love it. I'm assuming you're talking about the singularity here, or the notion of the singularity. Is that what we're talking about?
I'm just talking about the fact that from a eternal optimism on the usage of technology perspective, I do think that we're closer to AGI systems coming in effect than what most people might think. But it's a good thing, because it will create systems, capabilities, processes, products, and services that will make our lives easier. And that will create more value for everyone to get through with that.
If people are interested in learning more about the report, where can they go?
There is a survey, a link on the Cloudera website. There's a lot more stats. Just like they say, death by slides, I didn't want to do death by analytical stats. And therefore, we've only discussed a few of them today. But there's a lot and much more richer context, even by verticals, than participants can go and have a look at.
Thank you so much for joining us. Looking forward to having you back on if we can in the coming year. It'd be super to have you back.
I would love to, and hopefully next time we can do it in Melbourne in person.
That'd be brilliant. Yeah, we'll have brunch, as you say.
Yeah.
Well, that is a wrap. Curious, what are your plans for deploying AI agentic technologies? Drop your ideas and comments into the chat area or hit us up on Cloudera's LinkedIn using the handle @Cloudera with your thoughts. As always, we do have a fabulous array of guests lined up. So if you've enjoyed today's episode, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss another drop. Thank you again to the folks at Cloudera. Thank you again, Abhas, for hosting another episode of the AI Forecast. And thank you all for listening in. We'll see you all next week.